The galaxy welcomed humanity with open arms, thinking they were harmless and weak. No one realized that behind their calm and humble appearance, humans were quietly learning, adapting, and preparing. A species once underestimated would soon awaken a power the galaxy had never seen. What was meant as a friendly welcome would become the galaxy's greatest source of fear. This is the story of humanity rising from the shadows to change the galaxy forever. Don't miss the next epic adventure. Hit subscribe and join us for more amazing stories. When humanity first appeared among the stars, no alarms were raised, no fleets mobilized, no ancient councils gathered in fear. Humanity arrived slowly, carefully, with small ships and open signals. Their messages were polite, cautious, and filled with respect. They did not demand territory or power. They asked for permission to speak, permission to trade, permission to learn. The great galactic empires saw nothing threatening in these newcomers. Humans were small in number, limited in technology, and carried no legendary weapons. Compared to civilizations that had ruled star systems for thousands of years, humanity looked fragile, almost innocent. The galaxy had seen young species before. Most burned out. Most were absorbed. Some vanished quietly. Humans seemed no different. So the galaxy welcomed them. Diplomatic envoys praised humanity's humility. Trade gates opened just enough to keep them useful but contained. Humans were given minor roles in supply routes, repair stations, and frontier colonies that older species no longer wanted. It was presented as generosity, a chance for humanity to grow under galactic guidance. The truth was simpler. The galaxy believed humans would never matter enough to become a threat. Human representatives accepted everything without protest. They smiled, bowed, and thanked their hosts. They signed treaties filled with limits and restrictions. They agreed to military caps, exploration boundaries, and technology controls. To the watching empires, it looked like submission. Humanity appeared grateful just to exist among the stars. What no one noticed was how closely humans listened. They listened during ceremonies, during trade negotiations, during casual conversations meant to impress them. They asked simple questions that revealed complex answers. They watched how power shifted, how favors were traded, how weaker systems were abandoned when inconvenient. Every welcome banquet was a lesson. Every friendly gesture revealed a rule of survival. Human settlers spread slowly across their assigned worlds. They built cities that blended into alien skylines. Their ships followed standard designs. Their technology stayed within allowed limits. To galactic observers, humans were copying, learning, and staying safely behind. No one asked why human academies trained historians alongside engineers. No one questioned why human merchants memorized old war treaties. No one cared that human children were taught galactic law as carefully as mathematics. The galaxy mistook politeness for weakness. They believed that because humans did not boast, they did not dream big. Because humans did not threaten, they did not plan. Humanity's silence was comforting. It reassured the old powers that nothing new had entered the stage. Behind closed doors, human leaders spoke differently. They spoke about survival, about history repeating itself, about how every empire eventually tested the limits of its kindness. They studied ancient collapses and forgotten wars. They understood that the open hand offered by the galaxy was not friendship, but control. And control always came with a cost. Still, humanity did not rush. They did not resist. They did not rebel. They continued to accept the galaxy's welcome with calm smiles and careful words. They allowed themselves to be underestimated because humans knew something the galaxy had forgotten. The greatest advantage a young species could have was time. Time to learn how the galaxy punished weakness. Time to understand which laws were flexible and which were sacred. Time to build trust without revealing strength. Humanity had survived a brutal homeworld by adapting, enduring, and waiting for the right moment. The stars would be no different. So the galaxy celebrated its newest member, congratulating itself on its wisdom and mercy. Humanity shook hands, signed agreements, and quietly stepped into the vast cosmic order. No one realized that the welcome they offered had planted a seed fed by curiosity, discipline, and memory. The galaxy believed it had welcomed a child. What it truly welcomed was a species that never forgot a lesson, never wasted an opportunity, and never confused kindness with safety. After the first welcome faded, humanity settled into the background of galactic life. They did not rush to expand. They did not challenge authority. They became quiet observers, moving through starports, markets, and councils without drawing attention. To the older species, humans blended in like shadows, always present but never important. Human diplomats attended meetings where great powers argued over borders and resources. They rarely spoke unless asked, and when they did, their words were careful and neutral. This made other species comfortable. They assumed humans had no strong opinions, no ambition, no hidden goals. What they did not see was how every argument was recorded, remembered, and analyzed later. Human traders traveled routes that powerful empires ignored. They carried simple goods, repaired old stations, and listened to stories told by tired crews. In these stories were truths no official record contained. They learned which fleets were always late, which admirals were feared by their own crews, which alliances existed only on paper. Humans treated these details like pieces of a puzzle, slowly fitting them together. In academies across human space, students studied more than science and engineering. They studied galactic history in painful detail. They learned how ancient empires rose and fell, how wars often began with small insults, and how treaties were broken when they became inconvenient. Professors taught that peace was never permanent, only paused. This was not fear. It was preparation. Human scientists worked within the limits set by galactic law, or so it appeared. Their technology matched approved designs, their ships followed standard patterns, and their weapons stayed within legal ranges. But humans focused on efficiency rather than size, coordination rather than power. They learned how to do more with less, how to make systems adaptable instead of impressive. While other species relied on tradition, humans relied on testing. They questioned everything, even rules that had existed for thousands of years. They asked why ships were built a certain way, why command structures were rigid, why response times were slow. These questions did not challenge authority openly, but they planted ideas that quietly changed human thinking. Galactic officials often praised humanity for being cooperative and sensible. Humans were used as examples of how young species should behave. This praise only made humans more careful. They understood that approval could disappear the moment it was no longer useful. So they remained polite, helpful, and forgettable. On frontier worlds, human settlers observed how protection really worked. When pirate attacks happened far from core systems, help arrived late or not at all. Human colonies learned that official promises did not guarantee safety. Instead of complaining, they adapted. They trained civilian crews, built layered defenses disguised as infrastructure, and practiced evacuation drills under the excuse of safety regulations. Human commanders rotated through joint exercises with alien fleets. They followed orders exactly, never showing creativity or initiative. This made them seem average, even dull. But after each exercise, they reviewed mistakes in private, learning from both their own failures and the arrogance of others. They noticed how overconfidence slowed reaction times, how pride blinded leaders to changing situations. The galaxy saw humans as students, quietly absorbing knowledge from their betters. In truth, humans were comparing notes, identifying patterns, and recognizing weaknesses that had gone unnoticed for centuries. Long peace had made the galaxy predictable. Humans understood that predictability was dangerous. There were moments when alien officers joked openly about humanity's lack of strength. They spoke freely in front of human listeners, assuming no offense would be taken. Humans smiled, laughed politely, and remembered every word. They did not feel anger. They felt clarity. Back on Earth and its colonies, leaders met not to plan conquest, but to plan survival. They agreed on one thing: humanity would never be caught unprepared. They would never depend fully on another power for protection. They would never assume fairness would save them. So humanity continued to observe, to listen, and to wait. They let the galaxy believe its welcome had worked, that humans were grateful guests who knew their place. The stars remained calm, trade flowed smoothly, and no alarms were raised. But beneath that calm surface, humanity was learning the galaxy better than the galaxy knew itself. And every lesson brought them one step closer to understanding exactly what kind of future awaited them. The moment that changed everything did not arrive with a declaration of war. It came quietly, wrapped in legal language and diplomatic delay. A human colony sat on the edge of a disputed system, rich in resources but far from the galaxy's core. Humans had built it slowly. investing years of work, families, and hope. It was legally protected by treaties signed during humanity's welcome, or so they believed. Tension grew when a powerful neighboring empire claimed historical ownership of the system. They sent warnings, then patrol ships testing reactions. Human settlers reported harassment, trade disruptions, and small acts of intimidation. Human diplomats filed formal complaints, trusting the galactic process. They believed rules existed for moments like this. The Galactic Council met, listened, and delayed. Committees formed. Reports were requested. Timelines stretched. While discussions dragged on, the neighboring empire escalated. Their fleets surrounded the system under the excuse of exercises. Communication interference increased. Supply convoys vanished without explanation. The humans remained calm, refusing to provoke a response, trusting that justice would arrive in time. Then the attack happened. It was fast and precise. The Empire claimed it was a policing action against illegal settlement. Their fleets struck orbital defenses, cut power grids, and disabled communication arrays. Human security forces fought back, but were outmatched. They were not built for open war, just protection. Within hours, the colony was burning. Civilians fled in emergency transports. Many did not make it. Cities that had taken decades to build were reduced to debris. Families were separated, histories erased. The Empire declared the system secured and closed. Humanity waited for the galaxy to respond. They expected outrage, sanctions, intervention. At the very least, condemnation. What came instead was silence, followed by careful statements. The Council expressed regret. A formal investigation was promised. Behind closed doors, deals were made. When the final ruling arrived, it was clean and cruel. The Council ruled that the system's ownership was unclear. To avoid wider conflict, the colony would not be restored. Humanity would receive compensation, trade credits, relocation assistance, and a formal apology. The decision was praised as balanced and necessary for galactic stability. To the galaxy, it was a practical solution. One small colony sacrificed to prevent a major war. Humans were expected to accept it, to grieve quietly, and move on. Young species had lost worlds before. This was not considered unusual. Human diplomats stood before the Council and listened to the ruling without interruption. They did not shout. They did not threaten. When asked for a response, the human representative thanked the Council for its time, declined the compensation, and formally rejected the ruling. The chamber was stunned. No one expected refusal. The rejection was calm, almost polite. The human delegate stated that a treaty broken without consequence was not a treaty at all, that a life lost could not be measured in trade credits, that accepting the ruling would mean accepting that human lives were expendable. The words were recorded, acknowledged, and quietly ignored. Other species whispered that humanity was being emotional, that they did not yet understand how the galaxy worked. Senior officials privately assumed the refusal was symbolic, that humans would calm down once grief faded. But something had shifted. Across human space, the news spread. Images of the destroyed colony circulated. Not just the ruins, but the Council's decision, the apology, the compensation offer. The message was clear. The galaxy's laws protected power, not people. Human reactions were not explosive. There were no riots, no reckless attacks. Instead, there was unity. Colonies held silent memorials. Fleets stood down publicly. Leaders spoke carefully, promising patience. Privately, policies changed overnight. Budgets were restructured. Projects once labeled theoretical were approved. Supply chains were reorganized. Military training schedules intensified under civilian justifications. Human industries shifted focus from trade efficiency to resilience. Human commanders reviewed the battle footage from the lost colony again and again. Not to mourn, but to learn. They identified response delays, command failures, and technological gaps. Every loss became a data point. The galaxy mistook the lack of immediate retaliation for acceptance. They believed the lesson had been learned. Humans had been shown their place. The borders stabilized, trade resumed, and attention moved elsewhere. But for humanity, the betrayal burned deeper than anger. It brought clarity. They now understood the true cost of dependence. They understood that welcome did not mean protection, and they understood that the galaxy would only respect strength it could not ignore. From that moment on, humanity stopped believing in fairness. They believed in preparation. They believed in memory. And they believed that one day the galaxy would be forced to remember the colony it chose to sacrifice. After the loss of the colony and the Council's ruling, the galaxy waited for humanity to react. Many expected protests, angry speeches, or reckless retaliation. None of that came. Instead, humanity responded with silence. Trade continued, treaties were honored, and diplomatic channels remained open. To outside observers, it looked like humans had accepted the decision and chosen to move on. Human representatives stopped arguing their case. They attended meetings as before, speaking politely and contributing when required. They did not bring up the destroyed colony again. This calm behavior reassured the great powers. They believed the young species had learned a painful but necessary lesson about compromise. Behind that calm surface, humanity made a choice. It was not a choice of revenge, but a refusal. A refusal to kneel, a refusal to forget, and a refusal to remain vulnerable. This decision was never announced publicly. It spread quietly through internal directives, policy changes, and long-term planning. Human governments redefined what security meant. Defense was no longer just about protecting borders. It became about ensuring survival under the worst conditions. Civilian industries were encouraged to design systems that could switch to emergency production. Transportation networks were built with hidden redundancies. Communication systems were hardened against interference. All of it was presented as efficiency upgrades and disaster preparedness. Publicly, human fleets appeared unchanged. Ship counts stayed within treaty limits. Patrol routes remained predictable. Training exercises followed approved schedules. Observers saw nothing alarming. They did not see the changes inside those ships. Crew coordination drills became more intense. Command structures were flattened to reduce decision delays. Simulations began to include impossible scenarios that human officers were expected to solve anyway. Human research facilities grew quieter. Some closed entirely, or at least appeared to. Data networks were segmented. Projects were renamed, classified, or distributed across multiple locations. To galactic inspectors, it looked like budget cuts or shifting priorities. In reality, it was concealment. Education changed as well. Military academies expanded their curriculum to include ethics, history, and crisis psychology. Leaders were trained to think under pressure, to adapt when plans failed, and to question orders that made no sense on the ground. Humanity did not want commanders who followed tradition blindly. They wanted thinkers who could survive chaos. On the frontier, colonies continued to grow, but differently than before. Settlements were designed to operate independently if cut off. Power grids were decentralized. Food production became local. Emergency shelters were disguised as community centers. These were not acts of fear. They were acts of experience. Diplomatically, humanity stopped seeking approval. They no longer tried to be model citizens, but they also did not break rules. Instead, they followed the letter of the law while exploring every gap it left open. They learned how to operate in the gray spaces between regulations. Where innovation was still allowed, alien observers noticed a subtle shift. Humans became harder to read. They were still polite, still cooperative, but less eager to please. They asked fewer questions, shared less information, and avoided commitments that created dependency. This was interpreted as maturity. The galaxy assumed humanity was growing into its role. What the galaxy did not understand was that humanity was preparing for a future where promises failed again. Humans did not believe betrayal was rare. They believed it was inevitable, and when it happened, they intended to be ready. Human leaders held private discussions about lines that could never be crossed again. Civilian sacrifice without defense was one. Treaties ignored without consequence was another. These were not threats. They were boundaries. And boundaries, once defined, shaped every decision that followed. The refusal to kneel was not dramatic. It did not involve raised voices or broken alliances. It was quiet, disciplined, and patient. Humanity chose to stand upright within the system that had wronged them, learning its rules better than anyone else. To the galaxy, humans looked calm, compliant, and contained. But inside human space, a shared understanding took hold. Never again would their survival depend entirely on another power's mercy. The galaxy had mistaken silence for surrender. In reality, it had just witnessed the moment humanity stopped asking for protection and started preparing to ensure it themselves. The change did not announce itself with banners or threats. It began with small signals that most of the galaxy ignored. Human trade convoys started arriving earlier than expected. Patrol fleets adjusted routes with unusual precision. Response times during minor emergencies became faster, smoother, almost effortless. To outside observers, it looked like efficiency, nothing more. Then a crisis erupted far from human space. A pirate coalition struck a neutral system, overwhelming local defenses and cutting off evacuation routes. The Galactic Council debated intervention. Delays followed, as they always did. Before a decision was reached, human ships arrived. Not a massive fleet, just enough. They coordinated with local forces, adapted instantly to changing conditions, and neutralized the threat within hours. Civilians were evacuated with minimal loss. The galaxy praised humanity for its cooperation, calling it a lucky success. What they did not notice was how human ships operated. They moved without rigid formations, communicated constantly across units, and changed tactics mid-battle without waiting for orders. It was unlike the slow, hierarchical methods most fleets used. After that, similar events followed: border skirmishes, system failures, sudden attacks. In each case, humanity responded effectively, never aggressively, never seeking credit. They stepped in, stabilized the situation, and withdrew. Each time, alien commanders reviewed the reports and felt a quiet discomfort they could not explain. Behind the scenes, humanity's hidden preparations came together. Fleets once listed as training units were fully operational. Civilian vessels revealed modular systems that could convert into support platforms. Research projects, once labeled theoretical, moved into deployment. Nothing violated galactic law. Every rule was followed exactly, just not in the way it was intended. Human commanders finally operated without pretending to be average. They trusted decentralized decision-making, allowing officers on the scene to act without waiting for approval. This speed created an advantage that others could not match. By the time traditional fleets reacted, the situation had already changed. The awakening was not about size or firepower alone. It was about mindset. Humans treated conflict as a problem to solve, not a ritual to perform. They expected plans to fail and prepared alternatives. They trained for chaos, while others trained for perfection. Alien intelligence services noticed increased activity in human space, but could not pinpoint anything illegal. Shipyards appeared unchanged. Production numbers stayed within limits. Yet the outcomes told a different story. Humanity was doing more with less, far more. Then came the first real confrontation. A powerful empire tested human resolve by pushing into a protected trade corridor, assuming humans would retreat or call for council mediation. Human fleets did neither. They intercepted calmly, blocked movement, and forced negotiations on the spot. No shots were fired. But the message was clear. Humanity would no longer step aside quietly. The encounter shocked observers, not because of violence, but because of confidence. Humans acted like equals, not guests. The Empire withdrew, unwilling to escalate against an opponent it could not easily predict. Across the galaxy, military analysts began to re-examine old assumptions. They realized humanity had never truly been weak. They had been restrained, learning, waiting, adapting. The welcome given to humans had not softened them. It had sharpened them. Human technology now revealed its true nature. Systems designed to be flexible instead of powerful. Networks built to survive damage instead of avoid it. Crews trained to operate independently instead of relying on command. These choices made human forces resilient. Difficult to cripple, hard to intimidate. The awakening reached a turning point when multiple systems requested human assistance directly, bypassing traditional powers. This frightened the old empires more than any battle could. Influence was shifting, quietly, steadily. Human leaders did not celebrate. They did not declare dominance. They understood this moment was dangerous. Visibility meant risk, so they moved carefully, choosing when to act and when to step back. The galaxy slowly realized that the species it had welcomed as harmless had transformed into something unexpected. Not conquerors, not victims, but a force shaped by patience, loss, and relentless preparation. What had been awakened was not rage, it was capability, and once revealed, it could never be unseen again. The first real test came when the galaxy's largest powers decided to act together. They saw humanity as a growing threat, small but unpredictable. They assumed overwhelming force would crush any resistance quickly. Fleets numbering in the thousands moved toward human-controlled systems. Strategy plans were drafted, and councils congratulated themselves on their wisdom. Human observers watched carefully. They did not panic. They did not retreat. Every fleet movement was logged. Every command structure analyzed. Every weakness noted. Humans understood that direct confrontation would come eventually, and they had prepared for it quietly, methodically. The first battle began near a star system humans had developed for trade and research. Alien fleets arrived expecting compliance. They expected surrender. They expected humiliation. What they encountered instead was coordination. Humanity's ships moved with precision. Units operating semi-independently, yet perfectly synchronized. They adapted instantly when initial attacks failed. They used terrain, asteroids, and debris fields to their advantage. Alien commanders were stunned. Tactics designed to overwhelm in numbers were neutralized by human flexibility. Fleets that relied on rigid formations could not adjust quickly enough. Their weapons fired too late. Their signals too slow. Humans anticipated reactions and countered them. Every engagement turned small victories into larger advantages. The galaxy began to notice cracks in its assumptions. Human losses occurred, of course. But each loss was calculated, each retreat tactical, each strike designed to teach a lesson and gain intelligence. Even when humanity seemed to falter, they recovered faster than expected. Reinforcing positions, rotating crews, repairing ships under fire, diplomatic channels erupted with confusion. Some alien powers demanded restraint, worried that escalating conflict would invite wider resistance. Others mocked humanity, thinking their triumphs were flukes, temporary luck or advantage in minor skirmishes. Yet the pattern repeated, again and again. Human efficiency and resilience proved real. Behind the scenes, human leaders analyzed every encounter with ruthless honesty. What worked, what failed, what the enemy would likely try next. They adapted constantly, using simulations, battle data, and lessons from previous wars to train officers. Even mistakes were opportunities. Data collected from losses was dissected, understood, and turned into future strength. The galaxy's confidence began to crumble slowly. Fleets that once dominated entire sectors were delayed by minor human tactics. Supply lines were intercepted or misdirected. Reconnaissance drones outsmarted. Communications jammed or rerouted. The great powers realized too late that they had underestimated not numbers, but intelligence, coordination, and adaptability. Alliances strained as the outcomes of minor battles shifted influence. Systems that had been loyal to older empires began requesting human protection, not as conquerors, but as stabilizers. The old powers felt fear for the first time. Uncertainty had replaced confidence, and that uncertainty spread like wildfire through command centers. Civilian populations in human systems remained calm. Even as conflict escalated, humans were prepared. They had designed infrastructure, evacuation procedures, and emergency protocols long before the first attack. Systems could sustain themselves even if isolated, giving humans strategic flexibility that others lacked. Even when heavily outnumbered, human fleets held formations, executed counterattacks, and maintained morale. The galaxy had never seen such discipline combined with adaptability. Rigid doctrines of centuries could not cope with humans' ability to improvise. Their creativity under pressure became a weapon as deadly as any missile or beam. After several months of engagement, it became clear the war was not going as the empires expected. Minor defeats compounded, morale faltered, supply chains stretched thin, and strategic mistakes multiplied. The largest fleets, despite their power, could not force a decisive victory. They had underestimated a species that refused to act predictably. The galaxy began to whisper about humanity differently. Admiration mixed with fear. Analysts speculated that humans had unlocked a new form of military art, one that relied on thought, speed, and adaptation rather than sheer force. Every engagement revealed that courage, intelligence, and preparation could challenge even the strongest empires. Human leaders did not celebrate publicly. They did not flaunt success. They simply noted patterns, made adjustments, and prepared for the next phase. Every victory was a lesson. Every defeat, a tool. They understood the war was not about destruction alone. It was about proving that humanity could survive, endure, and thrive. By the end of the campaign, the galaxy knew something fundamental had changed. Humans were no longer underestimated. The balance of power had shifted quietly, steadily, and the species that had once been welcomed as harmless now stood as a force that could not be ignored. After months of battles, minor victories, and careful observation, the galaxy's perception of humanity began to shift. What had been seen as a young, harmless species was now recognized as unpredictable, capable, and disciplined. Systems that had once ignored human presence now sought their assistance, not because humans demanded it, but because they had proven themselves reliable and effective. The shift was subtle at first. Messages requesting mediation, technical advice, and logistical support arrived quietly, often routed through channels that bypassed traditional power structures. Older empires noticed these changes and felt a quiet panic. Their influence over border systems weakened, their control over trade routes challenged, their assumption that humans would remain passive shattered. Human leaders did not seek attention. They acted with restraint, stepping in only where necessary. They stabilized conflicts before they escalated, ensured civilians were protected, and withdrew without occupying systems unnecessarily. This calm, precise action created a sense of inevitability. Humans did not conquer. They simply ensured order where chaos threatened to expand. Alien powers began to realize that the young species they had welcomed into their galaxy could no longer be treated lightly. Former allies approached human diplomats with caution, offering cooperation and respect instead of casual guidance. They understood that humans had learned lessons quickly. They understood that patience, discipline, and intelligence were as dangerous as fleets of warships. Fear spread quietly among the great councils, not fear of aggression, but fear of what humanity represented. A species that could endure hardship, learn rapidly, and adapt faster than anyone expected. They did not boast or threaten, yet the message was unmistakable. Humanity could no longer be underestimated. The first public acknowledgement came when a minor crisis arose in a distant sector. Pirates had begun to attack a system, expecting local forces to struggle. The council delayed its response as usual, but humans moved immediately. Their fleet arrived within days, coordinated with local defense forces, neutralized the threat, and evacuated civilians efficiently. No public declarations, no parades, just effective action. Reports of this intervention spread through the galaxy. Analysts recalculated strategies, political advisors reconsidered alliances, military academies studied human tactics in secret. The idea that humans were harmless became impossible to maintain. Even small victories had large consequences. The perception of control shifted. Old powers realized they had underestimated more than just a species. They had underestimated determination, intelligence, and resilience. Human leaders remained careful, always aware that visibility brought risk. Every decision was weighed against long-term survival. Every action ensured that humans remained capable without provoking unnecessary hostility. Diplomacy and action blended seamlessly. Humans enforced stability not for conquest, but because chaos threatened their people and systems they had come to support. Meanwhile, the galaxy's older powers grew uneasy. Systems that had once taken guidance now quietly followed human advice. Trade routes adjusted to accommodate human strategies. Commanders revised battle plans based on human success. The old empires could no longer assume they understood the galaxy completely. Even allies approached interactions differently. They no longer offered casual advice or support freely. They treated humans with respect, often caution. The young species had become a stabilizing force without anyone realizing it. Not by aggression, but by consistent, disciplined, and effective response to every challenge. Stories of human efficiency and resolve began to circulate widely, not just military exploits, but logistical mastery, disaster response, and organizational skill. Civilian populations began to trust human-led efforts more than traditional authorities. The quiet reputation grew, spreading fear as much as admiration. The galaxy began to understand that the welcome once extended to humanity had awakened something profound. It was not fury, not a desire for conquest, but a form of power that demanded recognition. Intelligence combined with patience, observation combined with action, strategy combined with adaptability. Humans had arrived quietly, learned the rules of the galaxy, and now applied them in ways no one had expected. Formerly skeptical systems now saw humanity as indispensable. Formerly confident empires now hesitated before issuing commands. The perception of dominance shifted as fear replaced welcome. By the end of this period, humanity had not conquered the galaxy, nor had it overthrown any power. Yet the message was clear. The species that once seemed harmless had grown into something essential and formidable. and the galaxy understood for the first time that humans were no longer to be underestimated. The galaxy had witnessed humanity grow from a quiet, welcomed species into a force that no one could ignore. Systems that once scoffed at human fleets now deferred to their judgment. Trade routes that were controlled by empires shifted to follow human strategy. Diplomats spoke cautiously, generals reviewed every assumption, and advisors whispered warnings in private. Human leaders did not claim victory. They did not celebrate publicly. They understood that recognition, like power, could attract danger. Instead, they continued their careful work, stabilizing conflicts, protecting systems, and ensuring that every human colony remained secure. Every action was measured, purposeful, and consistent. The older powers realized too late that their underestimation had created consequences. Minor errors in past interactions had compounded. Delays in enforcement had allowed humans to strengthen quietly. Now, the galaxy faced a species that understood its own strengths, its weaknesses, and the true rules of survival. Humans did not seek revenge for past wrongs. They did not invade or conquer. They acted with a sense of measured justice. When a system requested assistance, human fleets responded quickly, neutralized threats, and withdrew once order was restored. This approach created trust in some areas and unease in others. For humans were no longer predictable. Their motives unclear, yet effective. Political councils attempted to regain control, passing resolutions, issuing warnings, demanding compliance. But human actions had already set a precedent. Systems no longer waited for permission. They coordinated with human forces, trusting their capability. The galaxy had to acknowledge that humanity had earned influence not through force, but through efficiency, reliability, and adaptability. The reputation of humanity spread. Stories circulated about fleets that acted faster than anyone expected, about colonies that thrived under pressure, about leaders who anticipated disaster before it struck. Analysts from multiple empires studied human tactics, attempting to find patterns, attempting to prepare for the unexpected. Even the most powerful empires understood that traditional intimidation no longer worked. Human resilience, strategic thinking, and coordination made them a species that could survive attacks, adapt quickly, and respond in ways that older powers could not predict. Fear grew quietly, replacing the earlier welcome, and it was more effective than any fleet of warships. Across human-controlled systems, life continued steadily, not ruled by conquest, but guided by preparation. Communities thrived under governance that valued foresight, coordination, and shared responsibility. Education emphasized history, strategy, and adaptability. Technology was applied to solve problems rather than show power. Human culture itself reflected the lessons learned from early hardship and betrayal. When the final assessments were made, the galaxy understood a fundamental truth. Humanity had not sought dominance, nor had it destroyed empires. They had simply ensured survival while demonstrating capability. Their strength lay not in aggression, but in preparation, observation, and action. The galaxy remembered the welcome it had extended, and it remembered the species it had underestimated. Former allies adjusted their approach, offering cooperation instead of casual guidance. Negotiating cautiously, aware that humanity now set standards for efficiency and reliability. Former enemies reconsidered strategies. They calculated differently. They hesitated, knowing that any misstep could meet unexpected resistance. In quiet moments within human command centers, leaders reflected on the path that had brought them here. From the first welcome, to betrayal, to refusal, to careful awakening. Every challenge had been a lesson, every setback a preparation. Humans had mastered patience and discipline, learning the galaxy faster than it learned them. The galaxy now feared humanity not because of conquest, but because humans had become unstoppable in ways no one could predict. They were flexible, intelligent, adaptive, and relentless. The species that once seemed weak had proven that courage, preparation, and discipline could change the rules, that a small fleet, disciplined and clever, could challenge the strongest powers in the universe. And as humans continued their quiet expansion, the lesson was written across the stars. The galaxy remembered the day it welcomed humanity, and it remembered the day it learned to fear what it had awakened. Every empire, every council, every fleet understood that the welcome extended in goodwill had created a force that would never again be taken lightly.